so this is my presentation. I thought instead of starting on the title slide, I would start with this picture, which kind of tells you a little about what my presentation is. So if you guys have never seen one of these before, it's a diagram which kind of has like a picture for different scenarios. It says like what society thinks I do, and then there's like a picture of a plant. And then it's like, my friends think I swim in money, and my boss thinks I blow things up. My family thinks all I do is write math on things. I think that I'm like really cool, like an engineer. But what I really do is make flow process diagrams. So this, I think, is accurate because my presentation is about the perception of chemical engineering and chemical engineers. So when I first was trying to find a major as a freshman, I was like, I really like chemistry. Maybe I'll be a chemical engineer, because I didn't really realize how different they were. So what I did for this presentation was I kind of researched a little bit about how chemical engineering is perceived by the public, not just from what I've experienced personally, and also what kind of resources are out there for people to be able to figure out what chemical engineering is. So I found this really cool website. I don't remember what it's called, but it's called like it's basically like an entire website just dedicated to telling people what the chemical engineering profession does. So there's all these different things like generating energy, saving the environment, et cetera, et cetera. So these are like all the cool things that people do when they're chemies. And so like this is an example of like a resource that's out there that really tells people what chemical engineers does. But what I found in my search was that there's like a huge discrepancy between like the information that there is available for people to understand what chemical engineers are and what chemical engineering is, and like what people actually know about these two things. So this is from the American Institute of Chemical Engineers website, which I'm sure you guys are all familiar with ECH, because if you're not, then that's a problem and you should go to an ECH meeting. The last one was last week, so good luck with that. Okay, so they had like a bunch of different resources. So they had a page that actually talked about what chemical engineering is, what chemical engineers do, and then they also had like a big page of like FAQs for people who like work in the industry and people who are like actual chemical engineers. So these are two of the questions in the FAQs. What are the positive aspects of being a chemical engineer, and what are the negative aspects of being a chemical engineer? And so you'll see the positive aspects: interesting work, interesting problems to solve, so very like generic engineering type of things. Nothing like specifically unique to chemical engineering, in my opinion. These things are pretty general. But if you look at the negative aspects, it says lack of understanding on the part of the public about what chemical engineers do. This to me was like really great that I actually found that somebody had said this besides me, and it wasn't just my personal opinion. And then this other thing is something that I can't really relate to at all, but I'm sure it happens too. So now I'm going to show you an example. So like I said, I found resources about what chemical engineering and chemical engineers do, and then I also found basically when I went into Google and I searched like chemical engineering, like perspectives on chemical engineering stereotypes, chemical engineering in public media, chemical engineers, basically I took chemical engineering and chemical engineers and like typed into Google with different phrases that I thought would tell me about like how people perceive it. And all I really found were resources and like a couple websites about people who are prospectively looking into it. So this was one of the ones I found, and it's on this website called Girl. So obviously like it's a website made for people who are interested in engineering professions. And it's somebody asking like if they should be a chemical engineer or a doctor, which to me was really weird because like those are very different professions. And I feel like part of the reason this person asked the question was because they didn't realize how different they were. And you see that they say like, I'm afraid that chemical engineering is going to be boring and I'm going to be stuck in it for the rest of my life. I want to be a doctor, but I can't afford it financially. But like there's people who are in chemical engineering that are also pre-med. So like this person probably didn't even realize that because they didn't really know much about it. And then there was this really long answer about what chemical engineering is, which was really good, and it was like sponsored by Lockheed Martin, so somebody in the field like went and answered it, and that was cool. So yeah, okay. So then here is another example, and this goes back to what I was talking about. So what I found is like the biggest like misconception about chemical engineering is like the idea that it's basically like being a chemistry like person, like that you mix chemicals and blow things up. So it's like she works for an important chemical lab, creating new products that are going to help us on our daily lives. And it's like she knows the ABC of atoms and chemical components. It's more like we know mass flow rate balances and unit ops, but you know, like people just assume that we like mix chemicals. So if you Google search like chemical engineering, you get pictures of like processes and like systems, and then you also get pictures of people just like in the lab mixing chemicals. So I feel like there's like this non-distinction between the two things. And so, yeah, that's what So here's another thing that I found. Oh. Pretend that didn't happen. Pretend that didn't happen. Okay. Okay. Sorry. Okay. So here's a diagram I found. It has 10 reasons to be a chemical engineer. And some of these are like legitimate, like chemical engineers get to change the world. But then there's this really big point that says like people will always be impressed with you tell them what you do for a living, which like goes back to this whole idea of like people don't really know what you do for a living, they just assume that it's impressive. So like, that's basically my whole contemporary issue here, is that people don't really know what chemical engineering is, what chemical engineers do, and that is a problem, and we need to solve that problem. So we need to maybe not tell people, or we need to like maybe explain to people what it is better. So our solution to that is, of course, you. So you are the solution to this problem because you guys are all chemical engineers. So when somebody asks you about your major, instead of being like, oh, we do stuff with diagrams and I am an engineer that has chemistry related, like it's good to actually explain it to people. So this goes on a broader, like, my goodness, this mouse, oh, okay. Anyways, so this is on like a broader spectrum, not just like telling people what it is, but also we're not very prevalent in public things in terms of like in movies. I was like, chemical engineering in movies, and there were like literally 5 roles in like the whole history of movies that had chemical engineers in them. One of them was like some diabolical person who like exploded something, which once again isn't really what chemical engineers do like in general. And also people seem to think that all chemical engineers either like blow things up or work in a plant, when we work in like nanotechnology and like, let's go back to this one. We work in like medicine and saving the environment, generating energy, enhancing food production, like we do all these different things that nobody knows about, which are like important for people to know about. So I guess in addition to like telling people, also making people aware. So you know, like if you see like, yeah, I guess if you, somebody, okay.
7:15.
I know, but there's like a, okay. So I guess the next time like you're like talking to your friends about your majors or like, I know sometimes people like to make videos where they explain things. Now I'm going kind of off topic, aren't I? Okay. Sometimes people like to make videos explaining things, and for some reason there's never any like interesting things about like chemical engineers and what they do. Like in the like daily life of like a chemical engineer. So I was like, engineers study all the time and they do this. So basically, my presentation once again is about like letting people know about that and understanding how we can work around it. So back to the movies. I mean, obviously not everybody's gonna like want to like go into the movie industry or something, but it's good that like if you have the opportunity like later on in your career, not to just like stick to your career and stay inside of it, because I think that's part of the problem is that like as I guess part of our profession, we just sort of stick to what we do. We don't really care that nobody knows what we do because we know we do important things and we're good with that. But it's important to like let people know about it, because in letting people know, we're like encouraging people to be part of our field. So that's the overall message of like you being the change. And yeah, that's my presentation. Told you it was really awkward.